the Memphis Tigers have their next football coach, and it is Charles Huff. We have a new Huff in the Memphis sports space, and this was the biggest story in the Memphis sports weekend that was, because we've talked about how important this hire is and what this period of time means for Memphis athletics. And I wanted to start by running through Charles Huff's resume, just in case there are any questions. Anyone missed it? Anyone might be asking, who's Charles Huff? I'm about to tell you, because I think some people have lost the plot a little bit, and I do think real normal people that I talked to this weekend are very, very excited about this hire. I'm excited about this hire. I think the basement dwellers of the internet don't speak for the general population. They exist. They are real. I'm talking about real people on the internet. But I do think that most people can understand why Memphis would make this hire and why it is exciting that they did so. So Charles Huff, as the new Tigers coach, he has real head coaching experience. He comes over from Southern Miss, but before that, he was at Marshall, where he led Marshall to a Sun Belt Conference championship in his fourth and final year there. While at Marshall, he was part of that Marshall team that upset Notre Dame in 2022. So that was his second season. After 4 seasons, he leaves for Southern Miss, a team that went 1-11 the year before he got there. He got them to 7-5 in his first and only season there before ultimately getting hired at Memphis. And the hire has not become official by the University of Memphis. It is expected to be announced probably sometime today. Charles Huff did send his goodbye message to Southern Miss on social media over the weekend. But that's 5 seasons as a head coach in Division I college football. And one of the things that I've discovered about Charles Huff in this process of understanding who the new Memphis head coach is, he's a former National Recruiter of the Year. He was ranked the #1 recruiter in college football. There is an Athletic article from 2020 titled, "What Makes Alabama's Charles Huff the #1 recruiter in college football?" And he was an assistant at Alabama under Nick Saban, and he's described as a people person, charming, which is very easy to see. I don't know, were you able to see any of the former Charles Huff press conference clips that kind of made the rounds this weekend? No? He's charismatic as hell. I would assume when he does the press conference at Memphis, when he is announced, when he is here, he will win the press conference because he is very endearing. There's a video of him at Marshall talking about how he wishes that he could get Ohio State-sized players, and he offers them biscuits if they would come and play for him at Marshall. But he was the nation's #1 recruiter by 24/7 Sports the year of that article, so back in 2020, when he was the assistant at Alabama. That experience under Nick Saban. He has coaching experience under James Franklin. He once got Saquon Barkley to flip to Penn State. And I really wanted to focus on this because Saquon Barkley has said that Charles Huff, the new Memphis Tigers head coach, molded him into the player he is today. Saquon Barkley, Super Bowl champion, the single-season NFL record holder for combined regular season and playoff rushing yards. That Saquon Barkley says that it is Huff who took him from being a very good player to a very great player. And there's a whole story about how he made him do high knees in a pool and sprints in a sand pit and jump roping after every training session to get his lower leg muscles and calf muscles right. And I want to read this quote specifically. So this is Saquon Barkley speaking on Charles Huff. And he said, quote, "We always talked about that Mamba mentality. He helped install that mentality and that confidence in me from my freshman year to my junior year. It wasn't the easy way. It was definitely tough. It wasn't going to just happen. He definitely made me work for it, but he knew my goal and the goals that we created for each other, and he held me accountable, and that was every single day. Never let me slack, never let me fall off whatsoever. He pushed me every day to be the best player and person that I can be. I'm forever thankful for him. I know one day he is going to make a heck of a head coach, and I will be happy to see that dream come true." And Charles Huff was a head coach at Marshall, at Southern Miss, and now at Memphis. And do you know who he recruited to Penn State after Saquon Barkley? Miles Sanders. And he also had experience with Najee Harris and developing him while at Alabama. And I was watching Red Zone this weekend, and it was so fun to see this sequence where it jumped from a Kenneth Gainwell touchdown to a Calvin Austin catch. And then a couple minutes later, it was one of Tony Pollard's touchdown runs for the Titans yesterday. And you're just reminded there is a recent history of electric skill players at Memphis making it to the NFL. And now you have a coach who has his own history of getting guys league ready. Guys like Saquon Barkley, like Najee Harris, like Miles Sanders. And you look at the coaching experience, not just from the player development side, but from the leadership growth opportunities of coaching under a Saban, of coaching under a James Franklin. He spent a year under PJ Fleck at Western Michigan. He spent 1 year with the Buffalo Bills as an assistant running back coach. So he has time in the league himself. He was a player originally. He was a walk-on at Hampton. His former teammates have talked about his work ethic and how he always stood out as someone they thought was going to go very far. He got his coaching start at Tennessee State as the O-line coach back in 2006. So that is nearly 20 years in the business. And that's a resume worthy of a hire, like point blank period. That's a resume to get excited about. And I think the only issue with this hire was the timing, because it just took a little too long. And it allowed some other narratives to breathe and grow and take off. And one of those being the Dan Mullen of it all. And CJ, you and I talked on Friday about, well, maybe Dan Mullen's not out of this, because you start hearing from the boosters, and the boosters want Dan Mullen, and the boosters say they might have the money. And we talked about it. You said it on Friday. Like if the Memphis Tigers hire Dan Mullen, that's the second biggest coaching story of the offseason. It's Lane Kiffin, and wow, why would Dan Mullen go from UNLV to Memphis? But it was always unlikely. But when there's time for something to grow, it becomes tantalizing. Stories take off, just the ideation of it all. And then the second thing in the waiting that happened was, if it wasn't going to be Dan Mullen, people thought that it was going to be Jerry Mack. And then Jerry Mack has this big moment in the Conference USA Championship game where not only was he named Conference USA champion or Conference USA Coach of the Year, he leads that team in Kennesaw State to a Conference USA Championship. You're seeing all these people talk about, wow, Jerry Mack, one of the best coaching jobs. He should get Coach of the Year votes along with Kurt Signetti. And so then you have that taking off. And then by the time you get to the Charles Huff hire, there's people saying, well, I thought there was a chance at Dan Mullen. Well, then I thought if it wasn't Dan Mullen, it was going to be this Jerry Mack that everyone's telling me is one of the best coaches in college football this year. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Charles Huff is a very, very, very good hire for the University of Memphis. What was your reaction to it all, CJ?
Good hire. Take that back. Good coach. Expect him to do well here. Terrible hire. And it's terrible because of the things you just laid out right there. Right? Like, you want to win the coaching hiring season because that gets energy into your fan base. And so you had energy there because the fans heard that there was a chance to get Dan Mullen, and the fans heard that there was a chance to get this Mack fellow. And listen, admittedly, I'm not super familiar with what's going on at Kennesaw State or at Marshall or at Southern Miss. You know, like, I'm not following those things closely. But if you look at what's happening, if you look at it from like what's on paper and what people are saying, then all three of them, Mullen, Mack, and Huff, seem to be capable head coaches. But during this time of the year, you don't want capable. You don't want a good coach. You want exciting. You want something that stops the press. You want something that everybody goes and hops on commercialappeal.com or dailymemphian.com, and that thing is right up there in bold. If we still read newspapers, you want to pick up the Sunday paper and boom, right there on the front page is this. This happened on Saturday, and it bumps whatever else you had planned to talk about on Sunday. It bumps it down on the list of importance because that is front page news. And Huff just isn't that. I think it's a really good hire. I think Memphis did a good job through this process. Wish it would have happened sooner. But you understand why. Because if you can get Mullen or if you can get Mack, those might be, as of right now, at this particular time, better coaches than what Huff is. That's not to say he's not a good enough coach, because I think that he is. So you wait on them to see what they're going to do. And then once it becomes clear that they're not going to be willing to leave their programs for whatever reason, you go out there and you get a coach like Huff, somebody with almost 20 years of experience, a little bit less, a little more than 20 years experience, somebody who, like you said, is a tremendous recruiter, somebody who has had success at a program like Marshall and had success at a program like Southern Miss. Southern Miss 1-11 the year before he got there. I think they were 3-9 the 2 years before he got there. So the 2 years before he got there, Southern Miss won 4 total games. He gets to Southern Miss late as well because of the whole Marshall situation, where Marshall just was like, hey, you 10-3, you beat Notre Dame. No, we're not gonna pay you more money. We're not going to renew your contract, and we're not going to give you a bump in pay. And so he's dealing with that, and that lends itself to him getting to Southern Miss pretty damn late in the whole calendar because the college football calendar is absurd. Gets there late in the calendar and still finds a way to get this Southern Miss program to 7 wins this season. So I think he's a good coach, but people just wanted something more exciting. But remember, more exciting doesn't mean good.
No. And also, a hire doesn't mean good. We won't know until the games are played. Like, you simply do not know how a coach will work out. All you can do is look at a resume and find yourself understanding what it is about someone who would make them the right hire for the time for the Memphis Tigers. And on the timeline front, I think they were chasing some of the coordinators too. Will Stein, the former now Oregon offensive coordinator who ends up at Kentucky. Blake Baker, who was attached to Tulane potentially. I think he's staying at LSU as the defensive coordinator now. There was the Georgia Tech offensive coordinator, Buster Faulkner, who I think ended up taking the offensive coordinator job at Florida. So you go through this process, and it ultimately lands on someone with legitimate head coaching experience in Charles Huff. So I certainly understand from the standpoint of fans not knowing how to feel when you get to Saturday, because it doesn't feel like a first option simply because of where it fell in the process and in the conversation. But it is very easy to see why Charles Huff is the new head coach at the University of Memphis. And I'm excited.